So recently I've been hearing a lot of questions about online small groups and how do we facilitate online small groups effectively. And with all of the stuff going on in the world, this is just an easier way to do small groups. Here's what I would say, and I'll give you a few practical suggestions on ways that I think you can facilitate small groups better online. But I think first we have to acknowledge there is a gain and a loss by moving small groups online. What do I mean? Well, recently I started participating over the last several months in an online small group with a group of people that some of them I knew and some of them I never met before. So when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking out of strictly an academic perspective. I've been doing it. I've been online with a bunch of guys having a small group on a regular basis. And while I want to just put one little caveat in before I start talking about it, because we need to recognize that small groups can only be a certain size before they stop being effective. Even if you're live with people, I don't think it's probably effective to have a small group that's bigger than 12. I think 10 is for some subjects and work stretching it. I generally prefer 8 people in a small group, but I don't think you can go lower than 5. So 5 to 8 in my mind is an ideal small group, and that still applies online. And I want you to hear that because sometimes when we say we're going to have a small group online and then we pack it with 25 people and go, I don't know why it didn't work. Well, it didn't work for the same reason it wouldn't work if you were together in person. Now, there are pros to being an online small group. And in this group has shown me quite a few of those pros. First of all, we're not all located in one spot. There are several people in other states. There are several people who live over an hour and a half drive from me. So the possibility of actually getting this group together live is pretty narrow. We're stretched thousands of miles. And I've been in small group conversations as an executive in other places where we're stretched hundreds of miles and sometimes thousands of miles and sometimes completely different countries. It's an international conversation. The pro to an online small group team meeting is that you can have people meet from all over the place as long as they synchronize the time so that they can engage as a small group. That's tremendous, and technology facilitating that is a beautiful thing. But it also means that there are cons to this, and that is that we can't actually really be present. What do I mean? I don't actually know how tall some of the guys are that I'm talking to because most of the time we're sitting down. And so the guys that I know personally, I know how tall they are because I've been with them in person. But most of these guys I've never been in person with. So there is some loss to the physical presence, the embodied presence of another person, and just knowing how tall or short they are, how their mannerisms work, what it looks like just to be close to other people. This feeling and need we have for community to feel close to them physically isn't just a mental thing that a technology thing can solve. It's a physical thing as well. And there's a lot that happens in our bodies, especially our nonverbal communication, that gets lost when we're actually engaging online. For instance, if you go online, and you've probably seen this if you've been in some kind of online segment and tried to present on video, you know that in a video, if I nod my head a little bit, which I'm nodding my head more than a little bit, it might be hard to see. If I want you to see me say yes, I actually have to make a bigger motion. If I want to use my hands and I just use them a little bit, it's hard to see on camera, so I actually have to move bigger. What does this mean? It means that when we get on a small group, we start realizing that we're performing for a camera rather than conversing with a group of people. Now, we may be doing both, I get that, but recognize that a performance with a camera comes with a different set of assumptions than being in a small group live and in person. So, what are some practical suggestions for facilitating a small group if you can't be in person? Or let's say you can't be in person right now. You've been in person together in the past. You will be in person together in the future. But for right now, you're doing small groups this way. What are my suggestions for facilitating that well? My suggestions are always going to kind of form around one concept, which is how do I make this as close as I can to the real life embodied small group experience? And some of my suggestions might even seem counterintuitive to you. But if you keep that idea in mind, that ethos in mind, we're trying to recreate the small group experience for each other as if we were live, you will begin to understand some of the rationale for some of the things I'm suggesting. So the first thing I'm suggesting is this. Encourage each person to find a quiet place before they join your online small group. Why do I say that? Because I want them to be able to pay attention. I want them to hear me. I want them to speak to me. And if they were coming to my group, they wouldn't bring all of the stuff that's going on in their house with them. They wouldn't sit out in the middle of nowhere. They would be with us. So the small group needs to meet with each other in ways that as much as possible, I understand it's not always possible, but as much as possible, eliminate the distractions that wouldn't happen if I were sitting in a room with all of you as a small group. Encourage that before they even start. When you get on together, there are some technical things that I would suggest to make this experience more like you're together. The first one is acknowledge the medium. What do I mean? You're on an online small group. Say, we're on an online small group. We recognize that this is not the same. Everybody now has to acknowledge, no, you're right. This is not the same as when we meet together, which means it probably will come with a different set of expectations based on the medium. There are going to be glitches. There are going to be hiccups. There are going to be moments when someone's talking and their video cuts out. There are going to be moments when it lags a little bit and you miss something and you got to ask some more questions. If you acknowledge the medium, then it becomes okay to go, hold on, we didn't hear that last part. Or you know what? You cut out part of the way through that. We didn't hear it. When we acknowledge the medium, we give people permission to say, this is a video problem, not a you problem, not a me problem, a medium problem. The thing that's coming between us is causing the communication issue. Let's talk about that thing. I couldn't hear you because your mic was turned off. I couldn't hear you because the video lagged or you cut out. Acknowledge the medium at the very beginning so that everybody has permission to say, sorry, something went wrong on my end. Sorry, I don't know what happened, but I couldn't hear you, couldn't see you, couldn't whatever. Next thing is, as often as possible, encourage video. Now you say, well, but I don't like being on video. Well, if you went to a small group, you wouldn't say, well, I'm just going to show up and I'm going to cover myself in a drape or a tarp so that you guys can't see me, but I'll effectively participate in your small group. That's not what would happen. If you're in a presentation where someone's giving a lecture or they're showing off a slide deck for a meeting, I get why you would just say, I'm not putting my screen up. I've been in some meetings where there were hundreds of people. I don't need you to see me. In fact, it might even be distracting in that large of a small group, large of a space. Why? Because it's not actually a small group. See, a small group would be that group of 5 to 10 people, and I would want everybody present. So I want to see everybody's face. It's crucial for me as often as possible to encourage video because a lot of our communication is through nonverbal communication. What our eyes, our smile, our posture say about what we're saying. So when I say encourage video as often as possible, I'm saying have every single person try to frame the shot, frame their video so that I can see, and most people are getting good at this now, so I'm not actually going to give you ratios or anything like that. But right now on video, you can see me from about here up. And I've thought through, how do I frame this shot so that I'm mostly in the video? This is called a bust shot or a 3/4 shot, depending if you want to add more because you're more of a vibrant move around person. But frame them so we can see some nonverbals. How would you identify when you're doing this well? I would say we need to be able to see more of you than your face, but you shouldn't be so far back that we miss when you smile or do something with your face. So a good, happy medium. Enough to see your posture, but not enough that I lose sight of what's going on with your face. If you're smiling, if you're frowning, if you're sad, if you're crying. You'd have to be close enough to see tears, because if you were in a small group, we could all see that. This one's going to seem a little counterintuitive to some of you. I discourage, in small group settings online, I discourage muting. Some of you say, well, wait, but we're not talking. No, but I don't want you to mute, because if you were here, you wouldn't mute yourself. You may not be talking, but talking is different than muting, isn't it? You'd be listening. Why do I say discourage muting? Because the moment, what I've seen and what I've experienced and what I've read is that the moment you mute something, you think these people can't hear me, so I can do other things. It discourages you from being present. If I can hear every single thing you do in the background, we're all looking at you, and I'll get to that in a second. If you're on video and I can hear every single thing that you do, which is what would happen if we were live in a small group, it forces the person who knows that people can hear them to be more present, which is what I'm really after when I'm trying to facilitate an online small group. And you say, but what if there's noise in the background? We already talked about that. Do your best to eliminate that noise. But if there's noise, you all need to know that that person's hearing noise so that you frame and talk in ways that are appropriate, knowing that there's noise in their background. You need to deal with that, not simply ignore it, which is what muting allows you to do. Next is I encourage every single small group to use like multi-view or gallery mode. That means that I can see everybody all at once rather than whoever's speaking. Because if you use the thing where it basically switches between speakers, the person who's speaking, I do get a better look at them. But realistically, I wind up not seeing how the other people are reacting. In a live small group, I wouldn't just be looking at the person talking to me. I would be looking at all the people and seeing how they reacted to this question, or this person said that and this person frowned. I want to be able to see as many faces as I can because that's what would happen in a live small group. Encourage multi-view. Discourage one person on the screen talking and then switching around. I lose sight of the other people and now I don't feel connected to them in ways that are helpful. So as much as possible, push for that multi-view or gallery mode type of view on every single person's screen. On top of that, I would encourage every single person who's watching it on a screen, I would ask, guys, in my small group, can we make sure that all of our screens are full screen? You say, why is that? Well, first of all, if I go full screen, the gallery mode makes everybody's picture bigger, and regardless of which device they're on. So now I can see them a little better. It also discourages me from checking my email, from going online and looking at a video, from doing something else. Remember in an earlier video, I talked about how I had a small group of teenagers who put their phones away because they didn't want to be distracted. This is equivalent to that. This would be equivalent to say, if we're in a small group, we're going to put our phones away so we're not watching videos and texting and doing all these other things. Well, if you're on a device, a laptop, a desktop, whatever it is you're looking at, if you have the capacity to do something else and everybody else knows that, it makes you all sense that each of you is less present than you are. So full screen, gallery view, we can see everybody and we're not distracted to do something else like check our email or do something else on our computer while we're in our small group. Be present. That would be what I would be encouraging if you were here with me. That should be what I'm encouraging while you're online. Along with being present and not being distracted and multitasking, I've even discouraged people and even set it up in some of my small groups when I'm in control of them to completely remove the private chat or texting. Why would you do that? What if people need to say something to one another? That's fine. They can talk to each other afterward. If we were here as a small group, you wouldn't sit texting one another. Well, you shouldn't. Why? Because it's like two people in a small group whispering to one another. It does not increase trust. In fact, it discourages trust because no matter what happens, when two people start whispering, you start thinking they're talking about you, especially if you were the last person to say something out loud. Discourage texting, discourage private chat inside some of these things, these platforms. Why? Because it's not a large group presentation. If it was a large group presentation, I would say, you know what? Go ahead. Because there's 100 people in the room. We're trying to make sure that something happens. I get it. But this is a small group. If there's something that needs to be said, it should be said to everyone. So discourage private chat and discourage texting. Like, don't pick up your phone and text. You wouldn't do that if you were present. Let's be present with one another. The last thing I would say to facilitate strong online small groups is make sure that you allocate time. Now, what do I mean? You actually are going to go a little slower. It sounds like technology will speed things up, but often when you're trying to have a conversation, when you're trying to dialogue with people with empathy and transparency, technology in this particular sense often makes it go slower because you have to account for, hey, the video cut out, or we have to ask 5 more questions that are clarifying because something didn't make sense, or the audio didn't, or something else was going on in the background, or something else was distracting. You have to allocate more time to do a small group, which means you either need one of two things. You need to increase the amount of time that you give to the small group to get done what would take an hour. Now you have to make it an hour and 15 minutes, or an hour and a half, depending on your group. Or you need to shrink what you're expecting. So often when I'm trying to do a small group and I know, hey, this is a meeting, I can only make it go an hour, I actually cut 20% of my expectation for what the meeting can get done. You have to leave time to accommodate the medium in the small group. If the video and the audio work properly, you'll get done early. Great. But often there's going to be a problem, at least on one person's end. Facilitate that by allocating enough time and being patient. Be patient with one another. As you're doing all these things online, recognize that the medium creates challenges that you're not even aware of at the moment. There's way more stuff to talk about how the medium impacts our capacity to engage one another. I can't talk about all of those things right now in this short video, but I can say that your best bet in an online setting is to learn to be extremely and patient with one another in all of the moments that are going on, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how something's going to impact. I've seen people who had satellite internet and a storm kicked up in the middle of the small group and it shut it down. I've seen people who had perfect small groups all the way through and then realized that some of the people had been muted, and some of them had been talking and they forgot to unmute themselves. And because they weren't sharing video, there were people who didn't feel heard. The medium has challenges to it. You need to not only acknowledge those, but be patient with them. Online small groups are extremely helpful in certain settings. We must acknowledge what is good about them, but also acknowledge that they will never really, truly replace the joy and the connection that happens when people are embodied in one place as a small group together.